Welcome, fans. We are live once again on the Cheap Beat Productions podcast empire. My name is Jack Kilby, no gimmicks guy on the socials. We'll be joined by the godfather of Cheap Beat himself, Maurice Shorthole, momentarily. But we have a very special guest today, a man who had quite a tenure in the WWF/WWE as a writer, and so much to talk about based on some of the very notable historical happenings in that company during the time. I would be speaking about Chris Gough. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jack, thanks for having me, and I'll see Maurice soon. But yeah, it was. I've been involved in wrestling since 1997, and now that I'm getting older, it's weird to see how long it's been. It was funny. Maurice reached out to me after it was my birthday last week. So there was a video that I ran an indie fed myself, and then I was part of a sort of a bigger indie fed around the Midwest years after that. And for my birthday, one of the referees of both those promotions put out a video of a commercial I did in 1997 that aired on Raw. And it was it was something, when I watch it now, I'm like, this would never happen now, because WWE would they'd hire an actor. They wouldn't have some intern from Missouri doing this commercial. And it would just have been a much bigger production than it ended up being, spending the day with, 3/5 of DX. But yeah, I was wondering if that was why he reached out this week.
Yeah, I think, this program is interested in not only interviewing those in front of the camera in the business, but also those that make things work and click and have crucial roles such as yourself backstage. But what motivated you, at least initially, to seek work in the professional wrestling business in general? Were you a fan, I take it?
Huge fan growing up of WWF. I never watched the NWA, WCW. ECW, I was from Kansas City, Missouri, so ECW wasn't a thing really at the time. So growing up, it was all, Gorilla Monsoon, Bobby Heenan, primetime wrestling. That's what I watched every week. I never really, so I went to college at the University of Missouri, was a broadcast journalism major. And it was one of those situations where, much like every college kid, you go in, you don't exactly know what you're going to do with your life. I thought maybe I'd go be a local sportscaster, and, the dreams of going to ESPN or whatever are always there. But, I actually had, University of Missouri is one of the best broadcasting schools in the world. And it brought a lot of people from different places there. And there was a kid at the time, I had no idea what Norwalk, Connecticut was, but he was from that area. And he said, "Hey, I know you like wrestling. My mom is she does the hair of some of the people that work in the HR department of WWF. Well, if we can get an internship, would you want to do that? And you can live with my parents." And like awesome, sure. And I tell everybody now, internships are the way to get a job. I mean, if you have any opportunity to get an internship, especially not just media, just anything. But this is what I eventually led to my job there. But long story short, this kid, it's coming down to time of what am I doing this summer? And I said, have you heard back? And he's like, "Oh, my parents moved to Minnesota, so I won't be there this summer." And I was like, well, crap. I was sort of banking on this. So he said that, so I had to go to my parents, and I said, "Hey, if I can get an internship with the WWF, would you help me pay for it?" Because it was non-paid at the time. And, Stamford, Connecticut, I found out, is really expensive. So they said yes, probably thinking there was no shot in hell of that happening. But anyway, they called up, and I'll never forget, there was this guy. His name was Matt DeLuca. He was a great guy. He was head of HR for WWF at the time. And he said, "Hey, got your resume. You're sort of further out than the people we normally bring in. They usually do Northeast people, I think, for the most part, obviously, being from up there. But I had put on my resume, of course, I'm a huge wrestling fan. I've been to all these events, whatever." And I always remember that he told me, "Don't tell anybody you're a fan when you come. Just don't, we don't want that to be something." So I thought that was weird. But I would like product recognition if I'm hiring people, but they did not. And of course, people can be annoying fans. People can be, I wasn't the kind of guy that was going to just mark out every second I met these people, but it's hard not to when you're a teenager. But anyway, so ended up going up there. My parents helped pay for it. I lived in the basement of this dude's house that had, I think collectively he might have spent $30 on the furniture. He called it a studio apartment and ended up being like $1,500 a month in 1997, which at the time, I mean, it's probably, that'd be $5,000 now. I don't know what it would be. But so anyway, I stayed up there, and the first summer I worked in the television production at 120 Hamilton was their television studios that apparently don't exist anymore. And then the second semester I went back and I worked for the second summer rather, I went back and worked for New Media, and I was under Shane McMahon. And then I ended up getting a full-time job there. So, yeah.
So how did you make that transition from interning to actually being on the writing staff? Because as you know better than I do, a lot of interns don't necessarily have that level of success that they translated into an actual job. What clicked for you, and was there an initial project that you were given that really got some attention?
Like I had a wrestling radio show in mid-Missouri. It's called Body Slam. I called myself the official WWF intern, as if that was something. And it was I don't know, man. I'm just a laid-back Midwestern kid. So, I just really hit it off with everybody in the television studio. And at the time, it was still, like I said, it was still a mom and pop place. I mean, there was a few hundred people working there, but it was not the mega conglomerate it has, become now. Just hit it off with everyone. And I think I ended up, when I chose to go to New Media instead of television production, it was because at that time, 98, 99, that was everything's going to the internet. We're going live pay-per-views. We're doing live everything. They were streaming everything then. It all failed back then, but that's what it was all going. And that entire department was a bunch of like 21 to 25-year-olds. So, I think it was an easy choice after everyone sort of knew me and I stayed in contact with them. Persistence pays off. I wasn't super annoying, but I just, I kept in touch with all of them, and we really hit it off. All those dudes up there were great people.
So we're going to talk about specifics in a second, but from your tenure, which was 97 to about 2003, correct me if I'm wrong, that was right. A real boom period in the business. You had the Monday Night Wars and that strict competition that was happening, and we'll drill down into that in a minute. But what was the most surreal experience you had in the writers' room during that time?
Well, I mean, when I I worked for Shane McMahon for a couple of years, 2.5 years. He was my first real official boss in my life, which is really, I mean, I worked at Dairy Queen, stuff like that, but my first professional age boss was Shane McMahon. And I will say this blue in the face, Shane McMahon is by far the best McMahon. I mean, he's a good dude. He's a fun guy. He's young at heart. He's just a great guy. And I loved working for Shane McMahon. I was actually the producer of Bite This for multiple years when that was first starting. And so we had some interesting things happen on Bite This. I mean, we had Shawn Michaels got pissed off at The Rock, vice versa. We had Stone Cold getting pissed, so he left the company because of like things that were said on that show. Vince McMahon called and wanted to be on Bite This the next week after Stone Cold said a bunch of stuff. I mean, that was interesting in of itself. But I think of that era more so than now, because when I hear people talk about wrestling now, I don't nearly hear the amount of people saying like, I want to be a writer. I don't hear that as much as I did 20 years ago, because there's a multitude of reasons that doesn't happen. Like at the time, it was like, the Vince Russos of the world and the Brian Gewirtz or whatever, they were known. Ed Ferrara, these were names that you knew. They were thrown out. Internet was new and stuff. Now it's grown to, 30 writers, and, some stay home, some go on the road, stuff like this. And it's a world I can't even comprehend. I think the biggest eye-opening thing for me when I finally when I finally made the jump to the television writing stuff, the brand split had just happened. So I went to Raw. My best friend that was at New Media with me went to SmackDown, and it ended up being, we had to write 2 10-page storyline arcs and send them into Stephanie, who was in charge of creative at the time. And I had a couple. He had a couple. We both got picked. Now, I was told at the time by Shane, like, you're probably hired to get fired because there was definitely a sibling rivalry. And that job, Ed Koski, who was there with me, is still there, which is amazing. He has been there for he is going on 25 years. I mean, it's on the writing team is amazing. You're hired to be fired there. It is. I mean, how many, even Brian Gewirtz, like at a certain point you tapping out, how many different storyline ideas can one dude have over 2 decades? But so we got hired. And when we went to that team, like I said, I went to Raw, but we would meet collectively in the writer's room, which is at the television studio at the time. And there was like 8 dudes in there plus Vince. So for a kid who had already been in the company, so had already been around all these people, so it wasn't like the first time I've seen a bunch of famous people. But Raw at the time was Michael Hayes, myself, Brian Gewirtz, and Ed Koski. And then SmackDown was David Lagana, Seth Mates, Bruce Pritchard, and Paul Heyman. And so I had loved ECW. I was a prime age for that. When I moved up there, I started watching ECW on, MSG at 1 a.m. in the morning on weekends. And, so it was really awesome to have Paul Heyman there. But anyway, that being in a room with those 8 guys, and then you're sitting there and your schedule was Vince would come in. He'd meet with the writers on, let's start on a Wednesday. We'd have meetings with Vince Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We'd meet some, go home. Saturday, we'd have a conference call or go on the roads for a pay-per-view. Sunday, you usually leave to go to Raw. And then, Monday morning meeting, Monday afternoon meeting, Monday night meeting, same thing on Tuesdays. And, it was a grind. It's a young man's job. And but to be in that world where you're flying on that jet with the everyone's seeing the WWF, WWE jet, I would be on there every week as a 23-year-old kid. I'd get bumped for like Triple H or JR on the way home. I'd ride commercial, but it was just that was like, even at the time, and we're going from jet with Vince to a limo to the arena to every night you're getting Ruth's Chris steaks or whatever you want for dinner and like these little, styrofoam takeout things, back to the jet, back to another limo. I mean, even at the time, I'm like, you're living a crazy life right now. And, you fully can't appreciate it when you're living in the moment, when you're in your low 20s. But even then, I knew how special that was.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's surreal in and of itself, to answer my own question. You've discussed Vince McMahon's leadership style and the controversies surrounding him, not even speaking of present day, but just the larger than life, to use a really worn out phrase, that he was. Did your perception of him change from your initial tenure there towards the end when you left?
Not really. Vince, when I was there, so it's weird for me to read all the sexual scandal stuff that he went through later after I left, whether it was a tanning bed in Connecticut or the Janelle Grant stuff. Of course, he had the female referee back in the 80s. So it's been all wide ranging. It hasn't just been a small era. But when I was with Vince, he was super good. It was good cop, bad cop. I thought Stephanie was bad cop. Vince was good cop. And, my friend and I, being single and 21, 22, we would go to the WWF gym pretty regularly. And it would be some crazy time. Like we go in at midnight, 1 a.m. or something stupid like that. And I swear to God, every other time Vince would be there with just me, my friend, me and Vince and his personal trainer, Gary, at the time. And he'd be like, "Oh, you boys are looking great." It would be like he would know us from that situation before I was on the writing team. But he was like, he's super into that fitness, obviously. So we got to know him then. And when we got on the writing team, he knew us from that. And he just was he was always like, he would never be offended by anything you ever said or asked in a writers meeting ever. Like he would never act. He'd maybe roll his eyes and give you shit if it was something that was stupid. I mean, not everybody pitches everything great all the time, including me and everybody else. But but he never got mad. he never threw a fit or anything like that. And so when I left, it was the same kind of thing. Like I always thought Vince was, for the most part, pretty even keeled and listened to everybody. I thought if I had to critique anything Vince did, which who am I to do that? But if I were to do that, I would say he always listened to whoever talked to him last, which sucked because, we could have the whole room wanting to do something. And if he had one last moment from Triple H, if he was like before the main event of something we all agreed to that's going to plan out the next 6 months, that would change, and that sucked, but not my company.
Were you in the time frame that it was purported that Vince would you'd have a full run sheet, you'd have it all planned out for TV, and then say at 4:00 on a Monday you ripped it up and it start over again? How did you deal with that if you did?
You had to. It was a weekly thing. I mean, I don't know. Again, you can sit here and chop this up so much, and I don't know what's right or wrong. I'm usually like first takes usually best. Like in TV, like my career post WWE has been as an anchor reporter in sports television and other things in that world, sort of. So I always think like first takes usually best. Now, I'm not saying that edits aren't good, and definitely the editing process is a big reason that things get enhanced or better. I get that, but it was frustrating. But again, like that's my only sort of Hollywood writing gig I ever had, so I don't really know who to compare it to. I mean, I think there were some other people that had Hollywood backgrounds, like Lagana and Gewurz had those a little bit, and so they could probably tell you a little bit more how different those would be. But I would say, it was not unusual for us to have something planned. Somebody had just turned heel, and he was going to be a major heel for us for the next 6 to 12 months. You basically go backwards from Mania, start working on these pay-per-views, sort of mapping out who they're going to take on each month. And then he'll get one good reaction in some town randomly that Vince is going to us on the TV. And he's like, "Did you hear that? That was a babyface pop." And so then he'd change it, and it would be like, okay, there goes that, month of we've been working on. But I mean, again, he can do what he wants, and he's the best promoter that's ever lived. So in wrestling, so.
Absolutely. We've got a ton of fan questions just in terms of the live viewers and sent in. One that was sent in was about a polarizing figure and wanting to know how you're working with one Vince Russo went during the tenure that you were working with. I'm assuming on Bite This a lot, correct?
No, he wasn't on Bite This very much at all. He wasn't involved. When I was there, he was strictly a television writer. I know he probably he really didn't really dabble in the magazine when I was there, because Barry Werner was the main dude at the magazine at that time, and sort of New Media was in the company. So on the same floor was New Media and magazine. We're all together, Brian Solomon and these other guys were on the magazine over here in these cubicles. And then on this side with like more media driven stuff and like a big conference room where we did a lot of production and stuff would be the New Media boys and girls. And so Vince was never involved in that. So the only thing I knew Vince was when we were walking around the halls or working in, and it was very brief because Vince left literally like a month or two after I full-time started. But he was, he was purely on his writer floor with Ed, and they were sort of in their own little studio. Bill Banks was still working there, and he's a writer. A long time people would know Bill Banks' name, and he was sort of like their sort of right-hand guy too, and they all left together. But I just remember when he left, it was like, jaws were dropping. It was a huge deal. It had never happened before. This era of writers was new anyway. And it was just to be in the building the day, like Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara left. They're going to WCW. That was like the scuttlebutt around the building was huge because that was like the ultimate swerve backstab. shocking coming from Vince Russo, but it was it was an amazing thing to sort of watch and sort of see people collect themselves, go through the whole rigmarole of going pissed off, sad. Okay, now we're gonna shove it up his ass now, whatever. And that's what we had to deal with. But as far as when I was still in new media when he left, and he wasn't really involved in any of that. It was purely on the road doing SmackDown and Raw.
Fair enough. Did you have a quote unquote favorite or favorites wrestlers, performers to write for when you were in the writing capacity? Oh, and here's Morris Shortle. Morris, you join us. We're right into it. We're just asking Chris about whether he had a favorite wrestler or performer or favorites to write for.
Apologies for being late, guys.
That's okay. When I was so the only sort of segments that I was in charge of all the time were the females. So I would have I had a lot of time with Trish and Victoria and Molly and Jackie, and this is when they were all. It was a very good sort of the early days of it becoming a real wrestling, segment. The women's it was more than just TNA at that point. It became I remember when we had our first hardcore women's match on Raw at the time, and it was and Victoria was involved in it, and it was Victoria and Trish, I believe, and it was I got to be real close with those ladies. They were fun to deal with because they were still trying to scrape and claw their way, and they were always pitching stuff. Ed Koski at the time was involved with tag teams, and then Gough was involved with the big boys. As far as as you can imagine, when you're on the writing team, you're the only people really dealing with the higher guys like Stone Cold Rock, Triple H, Mick Foley are the Gough to a degree, Vince to a bigger degree, and of course Rock and Gough have their longtime relationship now, and he worked on his did a lot of stuff for the Rock. But nobody really. D'Lo Brown, a lot of these guys were Raven was constantly pitching stuff. D'Lo was always trying to get on. Al Snow, these guys were all. It was an era of a lot of people were really proactive in trying to get on TV, and at that time, when WCW had just been dead less than a year before. It was sort of you had an embarrassment of riches. You almost had too many people there. I had Stevie Richards was another guy I loved doing stuff with. These are guys that, but again, I can't sit here and tell you I was working shoulder to shoulder with The Rock, because that just wasn't happening. Those are the big dogs that could basically do whatever the hell they wanted. They just needed to get final approval from Vince. But everyone on that roster, when they split it, and they did sort of it was pre-draft era. So it was sort of they sort of just, I forget how they first sort of shook it out. But the Raw team was basically more sizzle. And then you had the SmackDown crew that was and my friends always give me trouble about this. SmackDown was all the great, in-ring wrestlers. You had Benoit, Guerrero, Kurt Angle. It was just Brock Lesnar was coming up on that side. Brock and Taker had their stuff early on, and then we were more storyline driven with Triple H had just been handed the big gold belt, so we had people going up against him like Kane and RVD and Booker T, so it was they were all fun to deal with, but the shows were quite different. And when people ask, of course, what are the most interesting angles that you've ever been a part of, by far it was Katie Vick. So there you go.
Can you talk a bit about, I was going to ask you that next, actually, how the heck did that thing come together?
It was just Vince, Vince would go, if you talk to people, Vince went through, and everyone goes through these, so I can't say it's a Vince thing, but there's just eras where you're I need to freshen it up. I need to, I want to know more about these wrestlers. I want to spend some time on this conference call talking about the background of these wrestlers and why they are who they are and how they got to become who they are and all this stuff. And he's Kane at the time had ripped his, I think it was his bicep, and he was coming back. So they were like, let's think of some ways that we can tell a story of Kane coming back. And it was on a conference call. I remember it very clearly. And it was like, he was basically like, does anyone have any ideas? Let's do more like sort of logic and more, real life based, what would, and so I remember pitching like, are you talking about like maybe he's coming back from drug rehab? Do you want to do like that real, or like what did you want? And he's like, and that maybe he was like addicted to, painkillers because he tore his bicep, and like Lita was going to be his, trying to talk him out of doing these drugs and stuff like that. And I remember he was like, it's a little too real, whatever. And so I was like, okay, we're not going to go that hard. And then other people were like, pitching stuff. But at the end of the day, Vince sort of mapped it out himself after we talked for a couple hours. And he's like, how about this? How about Kane was on his way home from the prom, and he had taken his girl, Katie Vick, who had his only person he ever loved. And, he loved her so much they were driving home, and it was a horrible rainstorm. And then they're driving home, and whatever happened, he took his hands off the wheel or his eye off the road, whatever, and he crashed the car, and Katie dies. And so he's never been the same since. That's why he's, this messed up mental person now, and blah, blah, blah. And we're like, okay, who's, and so then the only reason why the person's name was Katie Vick was because Scott Vick, who was Sick Boy in WCW, had been signed to like he was down in like developmental, and they were like, I remember they were saying, yeah, he looks pretty good, yeah, he could come up, maybe be a part of this. And so his last name was going to be Vick because they were going to try to tie in Scott Vick with Katie Vick, like, that's my sister and I'm going to avenge her death, or whatever. And then they were like, well, we need a first name. And like, as my friend always jokes, and the one thing that Stephanie actually contributed to creative, she's like, how about Katie? And then it was Katie Vick. So then at that point, that was the story. And then we get to the show, and they had gone off site, Gewurz and Bruce Pritchard and Triple H, Stephanie and Vince, and they came back and they had taped what you saw on TV, which was, Triple H dressed like Kane screwing a mannequin or a dead body in a cheerleader outfit in a in like a funeral home. So how it went from A to B is only from the people that actually went from that phone call to the funeral home that day to explain. But when we were watching the pre-tape, where he finishes with the class, everybody knows Katie Vick, the classic line of, I just screwed your brains out. And he just pulls up some spaghetti or whatever. We're watching it and like, sort of horror, sort of disbelief as it played out to the crowd. And they still talk about that to this day, to being like the worst thing ever. And I can understand why.
Highly entertaining though.
In some circles it was I don't know where they were going to go with that. Obviously they, Triple H was getting a lot of heat on Kane because Kane had accidentally involuntary manslaughtered his girlfriend. So I don't know. They were trying to make he was a big heel after that. So if you recall, there was a Raw Roulette show. It was the first Raw Roulette. And that was right before that. It was the week before where it was like Raw Roulette was great. It was at Vegas, and like the whole show was good, and it was just a fun, gimmicky show. And at the end, Triple H, everyone thought they sort of ruined it because he came out with the mic at the very end. He was like, Kane, I know your secret, or whatever he said. And like, I'm going to reveal it next week. You're a horrible person. And then it led to, the fake screwing of the brains out.
Was there ever anything, Chris, that you had pitched before in WWE that you think was a great idea, but for whatever reason they wouldn't entertain it?
You always think you pitch a lot of great stuff, and then it really came down to Gewurz was a really smart dude, and he had a style, and he was the last man. Every Hollywood show has a lead writer. You got a million other people throwing out ideas they think are great. And then it's a hard job for the lead writer to be like, okay, that's good, or I'm just actually going to go with my ideas because like I'm here for a reason. And he's Brian Gewirtz is a super talented dude. But like stuff that I remember specifically, one thing that I thought would have been fun, this is all pre-draft and everything, was I wanted to have I pitched an election, like an election angle to be like the sort of the president GM Raw. And it was going to be, Stone Cold versus, it was a couple people. And it was like, I was like, you could have election, you could have more like election, gimmicky commercials. You could have like rallies. You could have like posters made up. And it was sort of a fun thing. And I was like, I just thought that would be like a fun angle. And it never came to fruition. The draft was always talked about, but as you can see, it's over the years, it sort of waters down. Dude, I would say this, when you're on the writing team, there's so much going on and there's so many levels of filtering going on that even if you think you're the most creative person in the world, like anything you say is going to be filtered out 20 times before it actually hits air. So, that's why I tell these people that for years, they'd be like, I want to be a writer. How can I be a writer? And I'm like, well, I mean, like, even if you think you've run like this awesome fantasy wrestling booking thing you have, much like Tony Khan, it's like it's a lot harder when you have to get there and you actually have people telling you, no, that sucks, or no, like I'd rather do this, and I'm and obviously you're dealing with a lot of egos. You're dealing with Stone Cold famously wouldn't work with several people that were possible main eventer guys or whatever. So it's just it's really tough. It was a tough thing to people like, what did you pitch that got on the air? Well, nothing I pitched ever got on the air the way I pitched it. It was like completely always just hashed to death. Which to your point earlier, which is, did it frustrate you that Vince we had to rewrite and have 100 meetings before every Raw? Yeah, it seemed like overkill. We'd rewrite it on the plane, then we'd rewrite it at the arena, then we'd rewrite it again at the agents meeting, then we'd rewrite it again right before the show. And but that was just Vince's way of, I guess, just making sure he got what he thought was the best thing on there. And it's a frustrating process to be part of a television, at least wrestling, creative thing.
Speaking of interesting historical angles, Matthew is asking who pitched the insane storyline of Don Marie, Tori Wilson, and Al Wilson.
Yeah, so the three. Well, there's like four big. There's a lot of, when I say big, I mean 4 very memorable things that happened while I was there, and they're all like sexual. So you have Kane, and you have Katie Vick and Kane. Then we had we needed a stunt for SmackDown, so we had the Billy and Chuck wedding. Then we had then we had the Tori Wilson, Al Wilson, that was her shoot dad, Al Wilson. And he would come, and like it was just funny that Tori Wilson's like one of the most beautiful gals ever in wrestling, and like here's her dad. Like it's just, I don't know. It's Billy Kidman still walking around. I don't know. It's weird. Anyway, and then that was just sort of a weird one. And then of course I was still there for HLA, so hot lesbian action. There was a lot of sexual stuff going on there. And it's funny, as I'm like in my 40s now, I look back and I'm like, man. I was drinking the Kool-Aid there, like people, I was in my 20s, people like, this is disgusting stuff. I would never let my kid watch that. And I'm like, and at the time I'm like, you prudes, you big wusses, like, come on, it's TV, whatever. But now I look back at that and I'm like, yeah, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. But when you're in it, it seems completely normal.
It was a different time, though.
It was crazy stuff going on TV. And it was before a lot of social justice / everyone offended by everything that you're like, okay, that would never happen now. Okay. But the Tori Wilson, Al Wilson angle was sort of pitched by Tori because like her dad really wanted to be involved. And that was a SmackDown that was on SmackDown. And Don Marie was open to doing like a little, like the angle with the old man. And like, it was just, there wasn't a specific person that pitched that, but Al Wilson was coming around a lot. And we were like, I remember we were told like Al Wilson he's open to doing stuff, and I still have like my friend, like got an artist to like draw, like Rob Schamberger. He lives in Kansas City. He's an artist, was at WWE forever. Now he's in AEW, but I have like a Al Wilson picture artist of him in like his underwear and a t-shirt to memorialize that great angle. But I just remember they're like, well, how are we going to end this? And you're like, oh, he's just going to get hit by a bus. I'm like, really? This is how we're going to kill Al Wilson, hit by a bus? And yeah, that's what happened.
Was there ever any thought to maybe having him die in the act of copulation due to a pacemaker or something like that, or no?
Oh, that was definitely talked about. Sure. I mean, anything was fair game at that point. I mean, it's funny to see how it extended after how lesbian action. Then you had the Vince Sable Trish stuff, that was like, I mean, it just continued to build. Yeah, there was always that, but I don't think actually Tori's pretty, as even though we've seen her naked and stuff in magazines, she's pretty. I don't think she wanted her dad to die in the middle of sex with Dawn Marie. But that was not like a huge angle, but it's very memorable for that era. So, but.
What did you? I know you were out of the company by this time, but what did you think of the angle where Vince ended up killing himself off, and then obviously with the timing of that, with what happened in real life with Chris Benoit? Like, what did you think about that whole scenario?
Well, I mean, I got to be honest. After I left there, I had some hard feelings for many ways of how my career ended there. And I was like, screw wrestling for like a couple years. So I hadn't watched a ton of like 04, 05, 06. And then, of course, Vince killing himself off was a huge talking point with all my friends and the colleagues that had been there because of just how centrally a part of everything he was. And now he's like, is he really going to do this? And so when he did that, of course, I mean, I think we all thought, my circle all thought it's going to be something like he rolled out of there like just in time. Something happened. He lived. He's going to pop. There's no way he was never going to be back on TV. I just cannot believe that. Now, had Vince run his course at that point, what is that, 07, 08? I mean, yes. I mean, Vince had been on TV for God, and as a commentator, but just as a lead heel, he'd been on there for 12, 10 years, I guess, around there. And man, he is one of the greatest heels of all time. But at that point, like, I think there was a lot of McMahon fatigue of all of them, Shane, Stephanie, Vince. And, I guess that was his way of getting out of that because that was the only way that he could exit the whole thing. But I mean, the irony of the whole thing is, like you said, like he pulls this crazy stunt off and then like Benoit just like completely just destroys the whole thing. He has to go on and do all these interviews about, the horrificness of that whole thing. So that, I often wonder what they would have done to continue that on if they were able to like really play out then who killed Vince, who did it. Like that would be an angle for a long time, I'm sure. And that would have been a fun angle. And I assume at some point it would have ended up where Vince was still alive.
Yeah.
Maybe Rikishi would be responsible for that one too. Ultimately, Ibzan is asking, and I want to add a bit onto this question, but he's asking: Jim Cornette hated working and living in Connecticut as an off-air talent. What was so bad there? And keeping in mind Cornette being the sort of penultimate wrestling traditionalist, how was your interaction with him being an outsider and a young guy?
Loved Jim Cornette. It didn't hurt that my first friend I made at the television studio was Dr. Tom Pritchard, who's still a good friend to this day. And of course, we all know the Heavenly Bodies and his connection with, they're still tight, him and Jim. So it's like, I got in the right people, like that was another cool thing when I started there. They had the Funkin' Dojos and like the WWE sort of the training was going on in the television studio garage where they had the ring, and that's where Edge and Christian and all these people started. Mark Henry was working out there. The first summer I was there was Darren Drozdoff and Giant Silva, if you remember him from the Oddities. They were both training with Dr. Tom like every day. The next summer it was Sean Stasiak and some others, but got real close with Draws. That's why after Draws got hurt, We had him on Bite This, and he had like a segment on there called Draws Us 2 Cents for several years, just because he was like an awesome dude that we wanted to still have involved. But Connecticut, so Jim Cornette was awesome. Years later, he's mentioned me several times on his podcast because I had him. Not only did I stay in contact with him through the years, but I had him come in to my indie fed before he stopped doing any indie feds, and he had like a really fun angle in Kansas City, and he was great. He was like he doesn't suffer a fool. He doesn't like stupid asses, but as long as you weren't that, he was totally cool. Do I understand why a guy from the Midwest like myself and him does not like living in Connecticut? Sure. Like I think the not only like as I told you, the expense is horrible. It's expensive as hell, especially if you're not used to. You know, the people on the coasts, they are used to having some crazy ass mortgage their entire life. And the people in the Midwest are used to paying off their house. So it's like completely different mindset when I went up there with all these people. Like when I went up there to Connecticut, no one had ever even seen Missouri unless they're flying over to California. And you know, I would also say that, and I think Jim Cornette would totally agree with this, the value of life there, the happiness of life, is sucks in the East Coast. It's just like everything is just like high paced, fast paced, like competitive. You own basically nothing because you don't make enough relative to how much everything costs up there. So everything is on mortgage or on loan, and just I don't know. A lot of people are up there dying of heart attacks a lot quicker, it seems, than people in the Midwest. A little bit more laid back, but. When he goes on his rants, because I listen to Cornette all the time, when he goes on his rants about living in Connecticut, I can totally understand it. I didn't have as big of a problem. I do remember, and again, this is like 1998. I was like looking at like a very modest home, and I'm like, maybe I could one day own this house. And it looked like, I don't know, it was not much bigger than like a double wide trailer. I was like, but it wasn't a trailer, but it's about that size. And it was like $350 or $400,000. And this was like 98. I know this is weird to talk about nowadays. I'd be like, that's a steal. But I'm talking about this is like 30 years ago before housing prices went through the roof. But it was just so freaking expensive up there. And, for a Kentucky boy, I could see why I hated
it. Do you have a particular moment from working in the WWE, that like your own personal memorable moment, your favorite moment from working there?
Man. I mean, I don't really have a singular moment. As I was telling Jack earlier, I just sort of like the life of being a young guy there was just really fun. I couldn't imagine doing it when I was in my mid to late 30s or 40s there. But, we just had a really good time. We were all like single dudes on that riding team. You would have like moments where wrestlers would tell you like, it was a great job, or like it was so competitive too, though, with the wrestlers that it was hard to get close to a lot of them. But, I don't know, man, when you look back and just being able to hang out with in Titan Tower that really no longer exists because it's sold, and at the television studio, which, I would just, to be able to sit around there and like when I was an intern, Gorilla Monsoon would still drive up in Natty, and like he would come in to do like voiceover work for like International Heat with Dr. Tom Pritchard. And I'm like, and he just walk around like, I mean, this freaking Gorilla Monsoon is so awesome. It's I love like the history of it all. I would spend so much time going into the at the time, they didn't have like a big place where they kept like all their Hall of Fame stuff. They would have this huge closet in the back, and that's where I saw like Mantar's huge ass head, and like they had all this crap back there. And that was also I'd go into the library before they digitized everything, and they had just this huge library where they would be like this, and you'd open it up, you could walk down this aisle, you have to close that one, and this aisle would open up. You'd have to know where stuff was. And like it was all on 1-inch reels or VHS or beta tape and all this stuff. And I was constantly searching for like hidden treasures. Now all this stuff's like put out there, but like it was like they were working on an Ultimate Warrior tape before he like skedaddled one of his 3 times he left or whatever. And I wanted to see this tape, you know, and I watched that. I watched all the episodes of the Bobby Heenan show. It was just like, it was unbelievable to be able to go through all that stuff and to be involved. I was sitting in Master Control when Mick Foley got thrown off the top of the Hell in the Cell, and everyone in the television studio just going ape shit. I mean, it's just like moments like just huge moments in wrestling were happening there. You know, it seemed like all the time. You know, I was there when WCW sold, and there's my boss on, you know, there's Shane McMahon up there. And then I was there for the first XFL. I was there for when ECW got sold. Now, all of a sudden, like, Paul Heyman's not paying anybody, and he's a commentator on the pay-per-view. You know, it's just there's just a ton of stuff that happened in that brief amount of time. The name change, going public as a you know a traded stock. I mean, that era from like 97 to 03, 04 was just, I mean, it was a very pivotal moment in wrestling history, not just WWF.
Yeah, absolutely. Polar Bear Sports has a good question. What's the probability that Brian Gewirtz is head of creative and replaces Triple H within the next 1 to 2 years tops, especially if The Rock wants to return for a potential Saudi Mania and, of course, The Rock's power position in the new entity?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think I think if Brian Gewirtz wants to be involved at any point, he has the right people in the right levels. You know, I don't know. I've messaged Brian several times since I left, and we had a good relationship. And, you know, what's funny is, like, when you really look back at it, that was like, I was on that writing team for about a year, which seemed like 20 years, but, he has seen like 100 of me since then, maybe probably more, 200 of me. So it's funny that if he would remember all these different people. Because even when I was there, man, we had people. There was the guy that wrote Liar Liar and Heartbreakers, the screenplays that were made into movies. He was there, and he got a tryout for it was 3 months, and maybe not even that. I don't even think it lasted that long. It was a huge like NWA mark. And he came in, and like you could just tell it wasn't gonna work out. Just the way he was like walking around, and he was being perceived by people. And he, you know, I mean, so many people just in my brief time came and went. Man, it's just a grinder. And but Brian was there, and he left on his own accord. He was there for so many years. Like I said, Ed Koski is still there, and they were really good friends, and I'm assuming they still are. So Brian Gewirtz can come back and do anything he wants. I mean, he's got The Rock. He did. The Rock is such a loyal dude, and he did so much for The Rock and his prime era of wrestling, and then beyond doing Young Rock stuff and all that. That, gosh, I don't know if Triple H will quit. I don't know if you're saying that because of health or whatever, but yes, I think at any point Brian could come back, and I'm sure he's had enough time off to recharge if he really wanted to go back into wrestling.
We've got another fan question here that you just touched on, but mentioned it in passing. But Pierce's Wrestling wants to know what the origin story of HLA was. How did Vince come up with this?
God, it was just an era. So we had Eric Bischoff there, and that was another crazy thing when you see these people show up that you vehemently hated because you're on the other side. So then when Eric Bischoff shows up as a character, and he did such a great job as an on-air character, especially with the juxtaposition of being with Vince against him and stuff, and being involved, kissing Stephanie, stuff like that. It was. He came on and was the general manager, of course, and he had his book coming out. Controversy Creates Cash, and from what I recall, that was just an era of, if we're going with that book title and we're going with sort of like some crazy stuff that we're going to do on Raw, what's some of the craziest stuff we can do? We're just going to start and. This was talked about in a meeting. I don't remember who pitched it first. It wasn't me. I can't take credit for it. But it was, like hot lesbian action, HLA, which, like, I mean, it's just funny, as if HLA meant anything before hot lesbian action. Oh yeah, hot lesbian action. No, it wasn't that. It was like no one like it wasn't like some kind of like abbreviation for something that you're throwing these words in. It just became like HLA. They just started chanting it, and then it was just funny. Every week we'd have to go and like find people to play hot lesbians in every town we were at because we didn't have traveling hot lesbians. So it was sort of like, I guess it was an extension and a more a crazier version, I guess, of the Godfather's hose. It's just ratcheting it up a little bit more. But I think it was that. It was basically like let's come up with some crazy stuff that Eric can sort of play off his book with, and he wanted to really like cause a stir, as he would always talk about on Raw, and that's sort of how it came up. I mean, these things. It's funny about these things, like how Katie Vick and HLA. These things didn't. This wasn't like, hey guys, I've been working on this. Here's my 6-month plan for the hot lesbian angle. Okay, so it's more like, hey, we need to fill an angle. And we're going to have Eric Bischoff come out and talk about, how he's going to he wants to turn Raw upside down and make it his own and do crazy shit. So, why don't we just, I don't know, why don't we have a couple of lesbians come out and they can make out and you can say like, look, this kind of stuff we can have. And dude, that's just as easy as it happens. And then then it becomes a thing. Like, oh, did you see those people react to the lesbians? We should do that every week. And then it becomes like okay, is there any payoff to any of it? No. But I mean, it's like sort of funny for a little while, right? I mean, that's wrestling in a nutshell.
Was it true that the quote unquote lesbians that were that we saw on television, were they hand selected from some of the, well, depending on where the taping was, the gentlemen's clubs in the area, and did Bischoff have a hand in that, given his connection to the Gold Club in Atlanta?
Cheetahs. Yeah, no, I think they had plenty of guys that had connections with I think half the boys, their wives are strippers or ex-strippers, so I think they had enough connections. But they, I don't know. Eric Bischoff did not personally go and vet the lesbians, but I think yes, we would definitely, just like the Godfather's hose, they would go and ask, the top establishments, not the toothless ones in the hillbilly towns, but like the really good city ones. They'd go get the top girls to come in, and most of them are not really. They were playing lesbians. I don't really know if they were active lesbians, but yes, they would get handpicked just for these Raws, and in the adult establishments. Sure, I mean, I don't know. In Milwaukee, it was probably harder than Vegas, but that's what happened.
Yeah. In terms of you leaving the role then in WWE, how did that come about, and what kind of guarantees do you have, if any, as a writer when you go into that role in a company like that?
Yeah, no guarantees. After I started, they sort of started implementing a 3-month rule where you would get hired for 3 months. And to be fair, like as a guy that's gone on to be like a middle manager and hire people at companies, a 3-month trial period is probably the best way to go when hiring anybody, because I've found out through the years that people put on quite the damn interview and bowl you over, and then you get them into the job and they suck ass. So like the writers would get 3 months, and basically after that 3-month period they would say we'd evaluate you, and like you'd say goodbye or like here's a job. We passed that. We continued on, my friend and I. My friend ended up quitting in right around Survivor Series of 2002, and then I stayed on till the middle of 2003. But what ended up happening was I just like it was a super stressful job, not a fun job really. I mean, it comes with a lot of like awesome like glitz and glamour. There's a lot of sizzle to that job, so I get why people think it's like super fun, and it was when you were 22. But I had like several sort of mix-ups or run-ins with Stephanie McMahon, and each time I thought I was going to get fired. And you got to understand, like, this was a dream job. I didn't think I was going to, I was sitting there working my ass off. Like, I never slept. I was the writer's assistant at the time. So you're basically getting calls from like, 3 a.m. Hey, this is Michael Hayes. I need you to think of a thing for me, this, and I need this, and I write it down. Thanks, bye. And I'm like, okay. It was like 3 a.m. You know, I mean, that's like how it is every day. You know, I'd come home, my parents would be like, they call those the lost years, because like I'd come home and I was like a zombie and I was on the phone all the time anyway, so it wasn't like I was home anyway. But it was like it puts a lot of pressure on whoever's on that job, definitely, especially at that time. It might be a lot calmer now, you know, for multiple reasons, but I just there was a mix up with like a limousine once where Vince was out waiting for a limousine and I was supposed to get the right time for him at this limousine, even though this is not my job, but Stephanie wanted me to make sure the limousine was at this time, right when Vince walks out or whatever. And it was like, 30 seconds late. So that became like a huge deal, you know, and looking back, maybe she was just looking for a reason to can my ass, you know, I was super tight with Shane. And at the time, Stephanie and Triple H were not married. They were dating. And it was sort of like Triple H would show up on these damn writer conference calls. Stephanie'd be at her house, you know, we'd take roll call and she'd be like, you know, what do you guys think of this? And we'd be like, okay, you know, what about this? And you hear in the background, well, I think, and it's like, it's Triple H is in her house telling her what to do, right? This is before. And like that led to a lot of crap that like sucked with like when he had the big gold belt and everybody's like, why didn't RVD ever get to be champion around that time? Well, we all voted RVD was going to be champion. September 2002. He's going to win at Unforgiven against – everyone voted for this. But at the last minute, he talks to Vince and like, it'd be more if they chase it. I'm like, okay, cool. So he's not going to drop it. Then the next month, everyone voted for Kane to beat him at No Mercy. Like, no, it'd mean more if I chase it. Then they went to Mania, and you're like, okay, Booker T, sort of a racial angle. Booker T's definitely going to win it. No, he loses it there. That whole era sucked, I thought, with that stuff. And I get it. They were trying to make the title mean more because it was just handed, and it's sort of heat anyway, where you're just like giving the belt to Triple H. So let him run with it for a little bit and let him drop it for mean something, I guess. But we didn't. None of us agreed with that at that point. But the thing that got me fired at the final straw, which was not the only reason, but we had a meeting with now you recall it was on USA Forever, and then it went to Spike, but it was on TNN for a while. And TNN, for many people, it was the Nashville network here in America, which was country music and, you know, the Statler Brothers and, you know, all this stuff, right? And then it got named the National Network for like 5 minutes. It was called the National Network. They were going to keep the call sign TNN. So she's like, everyone, we're going to have a meeting tomorrow in the conference room, and it's going to be with executives from TNN, and they want to know why ratings aren't as good as they were on USA. So, you know, everybody come with questions, and I expect you guys to talk, and if you don't, you'll be in trouble, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, okay, you know, we better come up with some good answers, questions, whatever. So we have this meeting in the conference room, and like the TNN executives are there, and they're like, you know, just wanted to get your guys' opinion of like why this stuff isn't you know, as high on the ratings, and we're not getting, you know, the same kind of numbers as USA Network did. And I just remember looking around the room, and the smart ones in hindsight were just they didn't say a damn word. Okay. And I shouldn't have said a word either, because like it's just things you don't know when you're stupid and young. But I just remember looking around, and I was thinking the opposite. I'm thinking I'm gonna get in trouble if I don't say anything. So I remember thinking, I said what I thought, which was, I mean, you guys have done I remember saying, you guys have done a really good job rebranding from the Nashville Network, because you were a channel that my grandparents watched for years, and now you're trying to do this sort of man channel, sort of like turned into Spike TV after that. And everything was manly and all this. And, but I said, but the problem is, like, you know, the recognition of that channel was just nowhere near USA Network at that time. Plus, like in New York, for example, or in Connecticut, USA was channel 8. And like the national network was like 47 or something. You know, it's like way up the dial when that stuff mattered. And I was like, USA was so embedded with, not only were they a bigger channel and had way more money behind it, but they had a lot more advertising. There's like billboards everywhere, Raw on Mondays on USA, and like in the magazines, like full page ads, all this stuff. I'm like, TNN never had any of that stuff. And of course, I'm just saying obvious stuff, you know. I'm saying like, you know, I mean, there's just not as much out there. But I'm giving them the compliment sandwich, right? Like, you guys are great. but you don't do nearly as much as USA Network did, and no one really knows your channel as much as USA, but you guys are doing a really good job working towards that, you know? And I just remember, I'm like, I thought I said pretty obvious stuff. And I remember I looked at Stephanie and she looked so pissed. so afterwards she's like, hey, I need to talk to you outside. Like, okay. So we go outside and she's just like, how dare you speak to our partners that way? And I was like, what? And I was like, you wanted us to ask us stuff, right? And she's like, how dare you talk to our partners that way? I should fire you for this. And I'm like, I mean, I'm taken aback, man. I'm like a kid. She's only a year or two older than me, but I was like, I did not want to lose this job. And so, man, I'll just forget the next day, HR came and knocking at like whatever in the afternoon. Her name was Palma Brax from HR, and she's like, Chris, I need to see you in the conference room on the 3rd floor. And I'm like, yeah, I'm fired. So I went up there, and it was like, here's the deal. You can either take the severance, and you can't say shit about anything for, I don't know, it was like a year or something, I don't know. Or you can you're going to get fired and this whatever. So I called my parents, like I am so upset. I called my parents and they were like, yeah, just take severance, whatever. So I did that and I came back down and I'm packing my shit up, and like Ed Koski and these other guys are like, hey man, like that sucks that you're leaving to go spend more time with your girlfriend. I'm like, what? And like Stephanie had told them all, because I was very well liked in that room and we all got along very well. And she had told them all that I was wanting to leave. I guess she's either lying or I guess she could say, I was trying to do you a favor, whatever. But she told them I was leaving to spend more time with my girlfriend. So as like that would happen, I just throw away my career. So anyway, so I left. And at that point, I was offered a job back with WWF.com or WWE.com. And I just remember thinking, like, all I asked from HR was, can I just make what I was making when I just left TV? And I had not had some huge raise to work on TV. I was making more than I was at the new media department, but I was like, and they were offering me something like $4,000 less. And I'm like, it was a principle thing. I was like, can I just make what I was making before? I never got a raise that much to be on this writing team. So, and dude, that like $3,000 or $4,000 that was a no. And I remember Shane was upset with me for not accepting their job offer. And that was something that the McMahons, and, I own my own business now. So it's sort of like, I get it. When you have employees and they don't think your company is the greatest in the world, they get really pissed off. It's just normal, I guess. But, I think he always thought, even though he's the best McMahon, he's a great dude. I just think he thought I should have like taken that job. No questions asked. You're lucky I'm even offering you this, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I appreciated it. And I told him that, but I was like, and it worked out for the best, man. I didn't want to live in the Northeast. I lived up there for another, 4 or 5 months. And then I ended up coming home after that. And it was the best thing for me, but it was a wild ride when I was younger.
Wanted to get your thoughts, a 2-part question before we wrap it up. But in terms of it's almost a non-issue now because the business has changed so much, even from when you were writing to now, as you mentioned at the top of the program, with so many writers. But you'll hear wrestling traditionalists say, you know what, the introduction of writers was a major negative for the business. The difference between the booker and creative team. How do you respond to that? And then part B is, with this new Unreal series on Netflix that everybody's talking about, do you feel that's a bridge too far to have people write in the writer's room?
Yes, I think Unreal. I don't have any desire to watch Unreal. I think that sucks. I think that's too much in. I know I'm totally cornet on that or whatever, but I just think that's, I get both sides. I get like why you're doing that now, because who cares at this point? The cat is completely out of the bag. The internet has ruined all of that, and there's never going to be real kayfabe. I mean, what's funny is like now I see stuff and like people are offended and pissed off if they're worked, which is like, this is what you should be enjoying, which is what I grew up with. But now they're like mad, like how dare they lie about Seth Rollins, and I'm like, that's sort of what you want, right? I mean, I think you want to be like sort of surprised by shit, but they don't. They find it as like offensive now, which is weird. But like Unreal to me is like, and they're not going to show everything in those rooms, of course. They're going to cherry pick what they're going to talk about on that. But I saw a clip of it, and I saw the guy sitting in that room, and I'm just like, man, this is just a little bit too much how the sausage is made, to the point to where it's like, how is this in any way? And of course, wrestling fans will lap up anything. You know, they'll lap up. It's like, I live in Kansas City now. It doesn't matter what the Chiefs put out. People are like, they'll watch anything about the Chiefs. I just want to watch Travis Kelce eating a sandwich on live. You know, I mean, it's just, that's fine. And they're gonna watch people. They're gonna watch anything that they put out that's super. But is Unreal really going to give them a ton of ratings? Is it really going to do all this stuff for them? No, it's just going to like add another layer of like, this is all bullshit. And like, I just don't like it. But as far as you talking about our writers better than the bookers, like, I can understand for a long time why Jim Cornette didn't want writers versus bookers, because, you know, writers screw up a lot of stuff. You know, they flower up too much stuff. They make too much. You know, we've seen that with Vince Russo is obviously the most well-known wrestling writer, and he will be of all time, just because of the era he was in, and like that small amount of time that was just so blown up, and all the craziness shit he did at WCW after he left WWF. Yes, it can go too far, but I think like what they need in today's world, I don't know how you can do it with just bookers. You can't just writers exist now because they don't even have house shows now to even book. It's just now it's all purely angle, and like the in-ring stuff outside of a premium live event is very much like, and it always was going to be very much down the totem pole of like what's worth anything. So now you need people to come. I mean, they have so much programming now too. I mean, back in the Cornette days, it's like you can have, you know, you're coming back to this town, you know, once a month. You don't really have to. Now you got a billion hours of television, and like you run through. I mean, this is going on when I was there 20 years ago. It's like you were burning through storylines now that should take 6 to 12 months in like a month. Like they're going through like okay, so I want to do JBL and, you know, Eddie Guerrero, and I'm like, okay, well, this could go like a full year. No, we want to wrap it up in like 60 days. I'm like, man. And so, I mean, if you're burning through that much content, you're going to need more people to come up with crazier and different ideas. And, you know, I love like the Triple H era. They would do like, you know, the Roman Reigns angle for so long, you know, and people were pissed that was taking long, but I like that. Like, I don't care. Like, people like stability. Like, most people like stability and like stuff going on, even if they're pissed off that it doesn't pay it off. Like Dave Meltzer was so pissed it didn't pay it off with like Sami Zayn or whatever. And I'm like, no. It's better if you just let this go forever as long as you possibly can, because you'll only get one of these storylines once every 10, 15 years. So I think they're necessary now. I do. Just the way that it's worked into. Now, Cornette would probably say, well, if they wouldn't have fucked it all up to this point, then they wouldn't need them now. They would have had the old school way anyway. But I think, like, in the way it is now, you need them. I mean, you definitely need. I don't know if you need 30. I mean, maybe, I don't know why they think more is better. Like, there's a lot of cooks in that kitchen, man. I mean, there was 4 per side when I was there, and even then was like, you know, not everybody's. There was plenty of ideas not used. So yeah, I don't know. Seems like too overkill.
Yeah, and people forget, like, Cornette, to his credit, talks about, well, even Dusty Rhodes burnt out, even Ole Anderson burnt out. So I think you're exactly right there, and it's just a completely different business than it was back in the 80s. So
yeah, I mean, like that was, you know, as much as I agree with Cornette on a lot of things, I mean, just he if it was up to Cornette, he probably would have never wanted Vince to go global. He'd want to keep everything regional. I mean, I've heard him say stuff like that. So, I mean, I don't think that was ever going to happen. I mean, if it wasn't Vince, someone else would have done the same thing. It would have been a national product by now, by far. And so at that point, like, and the internet is another thing that I always say to my friends, like, if I could, the internet's awesome. We're all together because of the internet, but it's also, if like you told me, like, can I kill the internet forever with a touch of a button or keep it? I would kill it. So it has ruined wrestling. The internet has I can't think of another industry that has ruined more than wrestling, maybe equal, but wrestling has just been decimated by it, and it still does well. I guess I should say it ruined wrestling how we knew it growing up. Now it has turned into performance art more than, like I said, people get pissed off if you work them now. So now it's more like they want to see the play rather than the mystery of it, the surprises of people showing up, the not knowing every single thing was actually better. But I get it. But that's not the world we live in now.
Couldn't agree with you more, Chris. What do you have going on in terms of projects? Where can the fans find you? Anything that they need to know about your current activities?
Well, I do. I own a winery now, so that's the only wrestling thing I do now is I do a podcast. I stopped doing it a little while back, but it was called The Worst Territory in the World, and it was about Kansas City. And I did if anyone wants to see a territorial documentary, I did one. Gosh, it's been almost 20 years now. It was called KC on the Mat, like Kansas City, KC on the Mat. And it's on YouTube, and it is about, so basically when I was working for it was a sports station here in town, and I did my own promotion here called Metro Pro Wrestling because it was called Metro Sports, the channel. And basically they allowed me to do this documentary with all the guys that were still alive. And I wanted to do it. It was like 06, 07 when I was doing it because these guys were all getting, like, they were all going to die. So, that was a Bob Geigel, Harley Race, Roger Kirby, Billy Howard. There were so many people, the biggest two being Geigel and Harley Race. But those
Brown?
guys, Bob Brown was already dead. Rufus Jones was already dead. It was like Bob Geigel lived to about 93, and Harley, even at the time, was probably only in his 60s. But I mean, Harley had a hard life, so like at any point, I was like, if Harley would have died any day, he would have been never shocked, really. But it was just it talks about the history of Kansas City and how it was always sort of like like Cornette always calls it the worst territory, that like is the worst. That's why I called it that, and Ric Flair always talked about how Bob Geigel would wear shower shoes, and he was like a shitty, representative of like someone in charge of a promotion just because he didn't dress the part. He wore like a plaid shirt and jeans. He didn't blow all his money. But it was so that's available to watch if you want to check that out. And I'd have to sometime I'll talk. I don't know if you guys ever talk indie wrestling, but I had an independent promotion for 6 years and talk about what a eye opener that was versus like my WWE career going into indie wrestling, and then let that run its course for like 6 years, and then we ended up doing another company that this super pretty rich dude wanted to do in the Midwest called the National Wrestling League. It was called the NWL, and it was the first wrestling company that I can say that paid. We had 8 to 10 full-time wrestlers that he paid a salary to, had full health benefits, also put them up in their own housing. And it was an unbelievable idea that this guy had. And it lasted only for about 2.5 years. And for many reasons it went out. It wasn't really that as much as other things that, sort of extravagant out of the gate that didn't need to be. But, I think that was, to me, that was like the last breath era of indie wrestling, to where I thought, it's a viable business still. Maybe nowadays I think indie wrestling is I think it's just it's a tertiary feeder ground to the other companies, like minor leagues. So it's not nearly the same as it was even 10-15 years ago. But I don't know, that's another day.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back to talk the Kansas City territory, being a historian myself, and definitely indie wrestling, having run a company as well. It's a good way to light a whole bunch of money on fire in the modern era.
Oh my God. We had television. So I worked at the television studio, and I actually produced a television show, and they paid me at my company to shoot it and edit it on the clock, which helped me a lot to have it for that long. But yes, I went into it not understanding anything about that level of wrestling. And good Lord, yeah. I mean, the old joke is, how do you make money in indie wrestling? You start with $1 million, you'll end up with 0. Yeah. But yeah, that is how it is. So I'm sure you have your own tales about all the egos and money problems and lack thereof you had to put up with.
Absolutely. Well, we'll definitely keep in touch and have you back if you can spare the time again. But thank you so much for your time today. It's a absolutely fascinating discussion, and we appreciate it greatly.
Cool. Thanks for having me,
Thanks,
guys.
Chris.
Fans, that's it for this edition of the Cheap Heat Productions podcast. Make sure you like this video if you enjoyed it, and also hit that notification button. We will talk to you next time. Thank you for watching this video. Please give it a like if you enjoyed it. Be sure to follow us on all social media platforms at Cheap Heat Productions. Don't forget to hit the notification button, and you won't miss any of our upcoming interviews, recurring programs, or